The last item on our Omnisphere agenda is to work with effects. These can be an integral part of any sound. Clicking on the FX tab, there's a rack of insert effects for layer A, a rack for layer B, and a patch common rack that takes the output of the layer racks. Each effect has an on-off switch. Above is a pull-down menu to select the specific effect unit. To the left is a preset pull-down for loading and saving effects for that specific rack effect. Above is a global rack preset pull-down, which can deal with the entire rack configuration. Here I switch to layer B's rack of insert effects. You can right-click on any parameter within the layer effects to set them up for modulation, MIDI CC learn, or host automation. Audio signals leave each of the layers insert effects to arrive at the patch common insert effects rack. Parameters in the patch common effects cannot be modulated with envelopes or LFOs, although they can be controlled by host automation or response to MIDI controllers. Once the sound has been processed by the patch common effects, it then moves on to the multi-mixer. Each of the 8 parts in the mixer has 4 aux sends available. Use the aux send level to adjust the wet-dry ratio of effects loaded into the aux racks. As an example, the default multi has a reverb loaded on aux 1 and a delay loaded on aux 2. Each of these is set to a mix ratio of 100%, and you'd use the aux send levels to control the amount of effect. As a final processing stage, all signals in the multi routed to output A can be processed by a rack of master insert effects. Let's navigate back to our active part in the multi, part 1, and click on the FX tab. This patch has several effects loaded on the layer A insert rack, so let's turn on the power for the radio delay. The mix slider for wet-dry ratio is always available under the power switch. With insert style effects, always adjust the wet-dry mix within the plugin itself. Many of the rack effects have 2 pages with a switch on the right-hand side to switch between these 2 views. Let's check out this feedback parameter on page 1. It's one of my favorite parameters to modulate. Sounds cool. Let's go to page 2 and check out the drive parameter. How would it be if we modulated both of these parameters together for a double intensity booster? Let's right-click on the feedback parameter and choose Modulate with LFO. In our edit page, we see that the LFO 2 has been selected to modulate the radio delay feedback parameter. I'll select an up ramp and set it to be 2 measures long and synchronized to the host tempo. With these settings, I can have the feedback ramp up from a minimum to maximum value every 2 measures. In Mod Matrix Zoom, we can control both the initial target value and the depth of modulation. I'll set the depth of modulation to 100% and the initial target setting to 0. Let's move to the second page and check out the drive parameter. If I right-click and select Modulate with LFO, it'll select LFO 3. So instead, I select all mod sources and select LFO 2 to modulate the drive parameter also. In Mod Matrix Zoom, I'll make the depth of modulation of overdrive less intense than it is for feedback. The moving white dots confirm what I'm already hearing. The modulation is not starting at the beginning of each 2-measure pattern. So let's switch our LFO to unipolar mode so that it only modulates in an upward direction. So let's recap how the effects are laid out. Each layer has its own rack of insert effects. The patch common insert effects then process the output of the layer racks and send the signal to the multi-mixer. Use one of 4 aux sends within the multi-mixer for wet-dry style effects, and then process the entire output of the multi with a master insert effects rack. So let's finish up our exploration of Omnisphere's effects. If you're not happy with a particular effect within the insert rack, you could turn it on or off, or choose a different preset from the left-hand side, which would change all of its parameters. I'll use the top pull-down to choose an entirely different unit, the vintage compressor. I'll engage its built-in limiter. From the rack presets menu, I'll use the librarian function to save the entire rack for later recall. After signals are processed in the layer A and B effects racks, they arrive at the patch common effects rack. Graphic EQ will come in handy to reduce some of that low-end resonant filter boost. I'll lower the energy at 83 and 125 Hz. Using the page button to access some additional parameters, I'll give a little energy boost at 2.5K. And I'll tame some of the harsh high-end frequencies with the upper bands of the EQ. So far we've been working with insert effects, first at the layer level, then at the patch comment level. Let's load a new sound for our song and use it to explore the aux send effects found in the multi-mixer. That slow melody could sure use some ambience. Sounds like it could use a little attitude as well. Let's go to our mixer effects and see what we can do. In our multi-view, we'll find the 4 separate aux send racks, as well as the master insert effects. Once you've loaded up a rack of effects on an aux, use the mixer to adjust the level of signal being sent from each part to that aux rack. The wet or processed output of the aux is combined with the original dry part output. Using the rack presets pull-down menu once again, I'll load something called a super phaser plate. This is a combination of 3 separate rack units, a reverb, followed by 2 separate phasers. My first order of business is to go to the mixer and bring up the send level from aux 1, sending signal to this rack of processes. Higher send levels result in a stronger output from the rack relative to my dry signal. I'll go to the reverb plugin and set its mix to 100% wet. In general, you want to use a wet-dry mix ratio of 100% when working with send style effects. Now let's check out some of the parameters in this rack of effects that we might be able to use host automation with. We can use that to create timbre variations over longer musical phrases. There's the feedback parameters of both phaser 1 and 2. Those sound pretty promising. Let's go to page 2 of the first phaser and check out the drive parameter. We can take a page out of the playbook of our previous video and automate both feedback and drive together. But I've noticed that adjusting those parameters is causing the plugin output to clip. This is a perfect situation to use one of the master insert effects. The tube limiter emulation sounds like it might be a good option. I'll choose a preset that sets it to limiting mode. I'll adjust the threshold, which in this unit determines the severity of signal compression, and make a few tweaks to the attack and release times. Now I think we're ready to have some geeky fun automating host parameters. We'll switch back to our aux 1 rack of effects and right-click on the drive parameter. From the menu, simply select Enable Host Automation. If you again right-click on the drive parameter, you'll see the host automation ID number that Omnisphere has assigned and publishes to your host sequencer. This same information can be found under the utility menu's MIDI Learn option. Selecting MIDI Learn Report opens your web browser. A web page is generated. This page lists all of the MIDI controller assignments and host automation ID numbers currently active in this multi. In this video, I'll demonstrate using live host automation. I've set my track to automation write mode. I'm going to press play and simply move the drive parameter. I'll create swells at the end of each of the 4 phrases in the 8-bar loop. So far, I haven't released the mouse. I'm simply moving the drive parameter up and down. Next, I'd like to automate the feedback parameter in the 3rd rack unit. Right-clicking on the knob, I select Enable Host Automation. With my track still in automation write mode, I simply press play on the sequencer and move the knob. You don't even have to stop playback in order to start automating new parameters. Simply keep your sequencer in play mode, Find your target parameter, right-click and select Enable Host Automation, and start moving the knob. In this case, I'm doing a third pass of live automation. This time, I'm working with the feedback parameter located on the second rack unit. I've already automated the drive parameter on page 1 of this same unit. I've also already recorded automation for the feedback parameter on the third unit in the rack. Automation and effects, another great combination.